Chapter 13 of Jimbo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Jimbo by Algernon Blackwood. Read by Adrian Pretzelis. Chapter 13. Flight. Since the night when Jimbo had nearly fallen into the yard and risked capture, Fright, the horrible owner of the house, had kept himself well out of the way, and had allowed himself to be neither seen nor heard. But the boy was not foolish enough to fall into the other trap, and imagine therefore that he did not know what was going on. Jimbo felt quite sure that he was only waiting his chance, and the governess's avoidance of the subject tended to confirm this supposition. "He's disappeared somewhere and taken the children with him," she declared when he questioned her, "and now you know almost as much as I do." "But not quite," he laughed. "Enough, though," she replied. "We want all our energy for escape when it comes. Don't bother about anything else for the moment." During the day, when he was alone, his thoughts and fancies often terrified him, but at night, when he was rushing through the heavens, the intense delight of flying drove all minor emotions out of his consciousness, and he even forgot his one great desire, to escape. One night, however, something happened that brought it back more keenly than ever. He had been flying alone, but had not gone far when he noticed that an easterly wind had begun to rise, and was blowing steadily behind him. With his recent instructions fresh in his head, he thought it wiser to turn homewards rather than fight his way back later against a really strong wind from this quarter. Flying low along the surface of the fields, so as to avoid its full force, he suddenly rose up with a good sweep, and settled on the top of the wall enclosing the yard. The moonlight lay bright over everything. His approach had been very quiet. He was just about to sail across to the window when something caught his eye, and he hesitated a moment and stared. Something was moving at the end of the courtyard. It seemed to him that the moonlight suddenly grew pale and ghastly. The night air turned chilly. Shivers began to run up and down his back. He folded his wings and watched. At the end of the yard he saw several figures moving busily to and fro in the shadow of the wall. They were very small, but close beside them all the time stood a much larger figure, which seemed to be directing their movements. There was no need to look twice. It was impossible to mistake these terrible little people and their hideous overseer. Horror rushed over the boy, and a wild scream was out in the night before he could possibly prevent it. At the same moment a cloud passed over the face of the moon, and the yard was shrouded in darkness. A minute later the cloud passed off, but while it was still too dark to see clearly, Jimbo was conscious of a rushing, whispering sound in the air, and something went past him at a tremendous pace into the sky. The wind stirred his hair as it passed, and a moment later he heard voices far away in the distance, up in the sky or within the house he could not tell, singing mournfully the song he now knew so well. "We dance with phantoms and with shadows play." And when he looked down at the yard he saw that it was deserted, and the corner by the little upright stones lay in the clear moonlight empty of figures, large or small. Shivering with fright, he flew across to the window ledge and almost tumbled into the arms of the governess, who was standing close inside. "What's the matter, child?" she asked in a voice that trembled a little. And, still shuddering, he told her how he thought he had seen the children working by the gravestones. All her efforts to calm him at first failed, but after a bit she drew his thoughts to pleasanter things, and he was not so certain after all that he had not been deceived by the cunning of the moonlight and the shadows. A long interval passed, and no further sign was given by the owner of the house or his band of frightened children. Jimbo soon lost himself again in the delights of flying and the joy of his increasing powers. Most of all he enjoyed the quiet starlit nights before the moon was up, for the moon dazzled the eyes in the rarefied air where they flew, whereas the stars gave just enough light to steer by without making it uncomfortable. Moreover, the moon often filled him with a kind of faint terror as of death. He could never gaze at her white face for long without feeling that something entered his heart with those silver rays, something that bode him no good. He never spoke of this to the governess. Indeed, he only recognized it himself when the moon was near the full, but it lay always in the depths of his being, and he felt dimly that it would have to be reckoned with before he could really escape for good. He took no liberties when the moon was at the full. He loved to hover, for he had learned by this time that most difficult of all flying feats, to hold the body vertical and whir the wings without rising or advancing. He loved to hover on windless nights over ponds and rivers, and see the stars reflected in their still pools. Indeed, sometimes he hovered till he dropped, and only saved himself from a wetting by sweeping up in a tremendous curve along the surface of the water, and thus up into the branches of the trees where the governess sat waiting for him. And then, after a little rest, they would launch forth again and fly over fields and woods, sometimes even as far as the hills that ran down the coast of the sea itself. They usually flew at a height of about 1,000 feet, and the earth passed beneath them like a great streaked shadow. But as soon as the moon was up, the whole country turned into a fairyland of wonder. Her light touched the woods with a softened magic, and the fields and hedges became frosted most delicately. Beneath a thin transparency of mist, the water shone with a silvery brilliance that always enabled them to distinguish it from the land at any height, while the farms and country houses were swathed in tender grey shadows through which the trees and chimneys pierced in slender lines of black. It was wonderful to watch the shadows everywhere spinning their blue veil of distance, that lent even to the commonest objects something of enchantment and mystery. Those were wonderful journeys they made together into the pathways of the silent night, along the unknown courses, into that hushed centre where they could almost hear the beatings of her great heart, like winged thoughts searching the huge vault, till the boy ached with the sensations of speed and distance, and the old yellow moon seemed to stagger across the sky. Sometimes they rose very high into the freezing air, so high that the earth became a dull shadow speckled with light. They saw the trains running in all directions, with thin threads of smoke shining in the glare of the open fire-boxes. But they seemed very tiny trains indeed, and stirred in him no recollections of the semi-annual visits to London town, when he went to the dentist, and lunched with the dreaded grandmother or the stiff and fashionable aunts. And when they came down again from these perilous heights, the scents of the earth rose to meet them, the perfume of woods and fields, and the smells of the open country. There was, too, the delight, the curious delight of windy nights, when the wind smote and buffeted them, knocking them suddenly sideways, whistling through their feathers, as if it wanted to tear them from their sockets.